Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Gary Parker, as always. We have episode 385 today for July 15th, 2024. And we got a news show for you today. Plenty of interesting topics to cover. Real quick, though, before we get to that, I wanted to give you an update on the book surge. We didn't meet any of the milestones I had hoped for, which is a shame. We got actually very close to cracking the top 10 in basically all three categories. I think at one point we were at maybe 13 on one and 15 on another. Very close to the top 10, and I think in the low 20s on the third category. Most of that happened on Monday and Tuesday, which, kind of makes sense. I imagine most people got the podcast on those days, and if they were going to do it, they did it because they were waiting to do it because I said to wait to do it. So, that's kind of when we spiked. I was hoping maybe we could get a little surge for the weekend, but it just definitely did not happen. So, nevertheless, thank you very much for everybody who participated, but I'm going to try one last thing just to see, and I'll tell you more about that after the news. So stay tuned. We'll try once more. We're going to focus on a single day this coming weekend. For any of you who missed it last week, this will be an opportunity to try again. And I don't know if it's still going. I didn't realize this when I first started it, but Amazon, at least currently, is running a buy two, get one free, or buy three for the price of two. That's how I think they phrase it. So if you wanted to buy multiple copies, maybe give one away or give one to your local library or senior center or something like that, this would be a great way to do that. So I will say more about that after the news. Also, as promised, I will be giving away a free ticket to DEF CON 32 in Las Vegas, Nevada. That will go from August 8th through August 11th. Though if you're going to go all the way to Vegas anyway, you might want to go a couple extra days and go to B-Sides as well. It's even cheaper and also fun. But the ticket that we have to give away is for DEF CON itself. It is a $480 value. The cost actually has gone up quite a bit. That's cheap for a tech conference, but it's kind of expensive for DEF CON. I think when I first started going a few years back, it was in the $300 range. So anyway, that may mean that they're going to give a really cool electronic badge this year. I haven't actually looked into that to see if that's the deal. But regardless, it's a free ticket to DEF CON. I'm basically going to do a straight up raffle for this because I realize that, not that many of you will both be willing and able to go. But if that interests you at all, DEF CON is a lot of fun. You might want to go back and listen to some of my DEF CON podcasts to get a flavor for what it's like. If you just go to podcast.firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com and search on DEF CON, you'll find those episodes pretty quickly. But if you ever thought about going, this would be a great one to go, and I will offer a little bit more incentive to do so, and I'll get into those details after the news. All right, so we got a good news show for you today. Lots of good, juicy topics to cover. We'll start off with an Australian man was charged with running a fake Wi-Fi router on domestic airline flights. A lawsuit against Airbnb about hidden cameras has exposed some interesting data on the number of complaints that people staying there have had over the years about being secretly recorded. Some popular Linksys mesh routers have been shown to send the Wi-Fi credentials in plain text across the internet, which is not a good thing. There's a new password cracking list making the rounds called RockU 2024. I'll explain a little bit about the history of that, but it purportedly contains 10 billion unique plain text passwords. Also, there's been another AT&T data breach, this one involving call records and text records and the metadata surrounding those. Signal has been under fire this week on social media, thanks to a rather provocative post from a security researcher named Misk, who we've talked about here before. There's a lot to unpack there, and I have opinions. We'll talk about that quite a bit. Mozilla has announced a trial for their privacy-preserving ad attribution technology, which apparently has been going on for a couple of years now, and I really either missed it or forgot about it, but it has come back up because they are putting it in Firefox and turning it on by default, which I do not appreciate. So we will talk about that quite a bit as well. And then finally, Proton continues to release very welcome new features for their product line, and they have finally come out with a Google Docs replacement that is end-to-end encrypted. And finally, for my tip of the week, I'm going to tell you how and why to block advertisements. So lots of stuff to talk about. Let's get right to it. All right, this is from the Hacker News. An Australian man has been charged with running a fake Wi-Fi access point during a domestic flight with an aim to steal users' credentials and data. The unnamed 42-year-old allegedly established fake free Wi-Fi access points which mimicked legitimate networks to capture personal data from unsuspecting victims who mistakenly connected to them, according to the Australian Federal Police, or the AFP. The agency said the subject was charged in May of 2024 after it launched an investigation a month earlier following a report from an airline about a suspicious Wi-Fi network identified by its employees during a domestic flight. A subsequent search of his baggage on April 19th led to the seizure of a portable wireless access device, a laptop, and a mobile phone. He was arrested on May 8th after a search warrant was executed at his home. The individual is said to have staged what's called an evil twin Wi-Fi attack across various locations, including domestic flights and airports in Perth, Melbourne, and Adelaide, to impersonate legitimate Wi-Fi networks. Users who attempted to connect to the free phony network were prompted to enter their email address or social media credentials through a captive portal web page. I'll come back to that in a second. This is a quote from the AFP, quote, "The email and password details harvested could be used to access more personal information, including a victim's online communications, stored images and videos, or bank details," unquote. The defendant has been charged with 3 counts of unauthorized impairment of electronic communication and 3 counts of possession or control of data with the intent to commit a serious offense. He has also been charged with 1 count of unauthorized access or modification of restricted data, 1 count of dishonesty obtaining or dealing in personal financial information, and 1 count of possession of identification information. If convicted, he faces up to a maximum of 23 years in prison. And here's a final quote from the AFP, quote, "To connect to a free Wi-Fi network, you shouldn't have to enter any personal details, such as logging in through an email or social media account. If you do want to use public Wi-Fi hotspots, install a reputable virtual private network, or VPN, on your devices to encrypt and secure your data when using the internet," unquote. Okay, I'm going to come back to that as well, but going all the way back for a second. So basically what this person did was they carried equipment with them onto these planes to set up a Wi-Fi network, battery operated or something. And that Wi-Fi network probably impersonated the Wi-Fi network that was available on the airplane, because it's easy to do. The SSID, the thing that says, free Qantas Airlines Wi-Fi or whatever, that's just a string that anybody can type into their Wi-Fi router. And he named his the same thing or something similar, something that looked like it was supposed to be free, airline Wi-Fi or whatever. And so people nearby would connect to that Wi-Fi hotspot that he had control over. And then as part of the connection process, you can throw up this captive portal. And if you're not familiar with that, if you've ever been to any place with free public Wi-Fi, they often, no matter what you try to connect to, once you connect to the Wi-Fi, and they throw up this starter page that says, "Hey, thanks for using our free Wi-Fi. Agree to these terms and conditions by checking this box. Read this policy here," which no one ever does, and then click here to continue. And then once you do that once, it remembers you and you can go surfing the web as usual. At places like hotels, oftentimes the captive portal will have you enter maybe your name and or room number so they can kind of keep track of who you are. But to my knowledge, they don't actually check that, so you can put whatever you want there. But in this case, this person threw up a captive portal that asked for credentials for social media accounts and things like that. And then once you put those in, you've given this person your credentials to that account, and they can do whatever they want with that account. So back to the advice given by the AFP here, a VPN would not have helped in this situation. You still would have had to gone through this captive portal. So a VPN would not have prevented that. And you still could have been tricked into giving away your credentials. The main takeaway, honestly, for me is what I keep telling you guys is I never use public Wi-Fi. So if I'm on a plane, even if they've got free Wi-Fi, I just don't use it. We're used to not having Wi-Fi in airplanes, so I just don't use it. If there was some sort of emergency situation, then yes, I would use a VPN. But again, that wouldn't protect for this particular case. So you still have to be careful. And if you sign into one of these Wi-Fi things and it asks you to give away credentials for social media or something, that should be a huge red flag. So instead of public Wi-Fi, I use my phone's hotspot feature, which most modern phones now have available, and most cellular accounts now include. You might have to pay for a higher level plan to get that. But that's what I do now instead of using public Wi-Fi. All right, moving on. This next one's from 9to5Mac. And it's about hidden cameras in Airbnb properties, which I spoke about a while back. There was some other news story about this. But the key to this story is that because of a lawsuit around this, some internal data has been released, and it's not good. A previously unreported lawsuit regarding hidden cameras in Airbnb properties reveals that the company generated 35,000 support tickets by customers complaining about surveillance devices. A lengthy CNN report says that the problem appears to be a substantial one. Thousands of images have been recovered from short-term rental hosts by law enforcement. Hidden cameras placed in bedrooms and bathrooms showing guests during their most private moments, changing clothes, being with their children, even having sex, according to CNN's review of court and police records, as well as interviews with nearly 24 guests who found surveillance devices at short-term rental properties or were told by police that they had been secretly recorded. But the scale of the problem had previously been unknown due to a number of Airbnb policies and practices. These include seeking to settle cases through arbitration and failing to notify police even when it seems clear a crime has been committed. And this appears to be a quote from the CNN report. During the hours-long deposition, the Airbnb employee also revealed that when a guest complains of a hidden camera, the company doesn't, as a matter of practice, notify law enforcement, not even when a child is involved. The company may, however, reach out to hosts about complaints as part of internal inquiries, a move law enforcement experts say could hinder criminal investigations because it gives suspects time to destroy evidence. Airbnb seeks to compel complainants into arbitration, a process that hides cases from public view, according to 6 attorneys who represented clients in cases against the short-term rental platform. When a settlement is reached, Airbnb has required users to sign confidentiality agreements, which bar them from discussing details of the deal. Airbnb told CNN its use of arbitration and non-disclosure agreements are standard practice within the industry, and that is sadly true. Okay, back to the article. A court ordered the company to disclose how many complaints it had received about surveillance devices in Airbnb properties in the past decade, and it responded that 35,000 tickets had been raised. Europe regulates the short-term rental industry, imposing wide-ranging controls on how companies like Airbnb can operate, but the U.S. has no similar federal regulations. That can, says the report, allow the company to claim it is only a tech platform and not responsible for anything that happens at the rental properties. Airbnb makes this argument under Section 230, legislation intended to protect web publishers from liability from comments posted by users. And this is a quote from Shannon Schott, who is a Florida attorney who settled an Airbnb suit for a client, saying, quote, "They're not arguing this didn't happen, your client isn't injured. They're arguing we aren't responsible," unquote. But one member of Congress hopes to change that. Illinois Representative Jan Schakowsky, who has introduced legislation that aims to curb big technologies companies' use of Section 230, argued that the platform would be safer if Airbnb were forced to take responsibility for what happens at its listings. Right now, Section 230 is used as a get-out-of-jail-free card, the Democratic lawmaker said. Now, Airbnb responded to this article and they said, the company told us that 35,000 tickets does not correspond to the number of complaints, as some complaints can generate multiple tickets. It also stated that the tickets related to surveillance devices, which can include things like doorbell cameras and noise sensors. Airbnb added that some of the tickets also refer to false alarms, where a renter believes a camera is present when it isn't. Okay, so yeah, that does muddy the water some, but that's still an awful lot of complaints. Now, this whole Section 230 thing really doesn't make sense to me. I don't know how Airbnb can claim to be a platform like a social media company. That just doesn't make sense. If they're talking about comments posted on forums that they host, on their website, maybe comments and reviews for properties, okay, then Section 230 would make sense. I mean, they shouldn't really be held liable if somebody posts a really nasty comment. But I don't know how in the world you could try to apply Section 230 to their policies around hidden web cameras on their properties. That doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. So anyway, takeaway here, again, be aware that when you're going to VRBO or Airbnb or some of these other services that let people rent their homes out to other people, there are some unscrupulous people who will hide, surveillance cameras and not tell you about them. Airbnb has policies that says they must disclose these things now, which is something they didn't always have, but apparently they have now. So you're supposed to know where they are, and there's never supposed to be a camera in like bedrooms and bathrooms and places like that where you're likely to be in states of undress. But it is still a problem, and one that you should be aware of. What do you do about it? it's really kind of hard to do anything about it. There are some techniques that you can use to try to spot hidden cameras, but it's not that easy to do. These cameras are super tiny. You can hide them just about anywhere. They're very difficult to find if they're hidden properly. The other takeaway for me here is that this forced arbitration stuff has got to change. I understand certainly why companies want to do this, but I don't know why we let them get away with doing it. Our court system isn't perfect. It's backed up. Arbitration can be good, but there's still some transparency that needs to go along with that somehow. But anyway, I'm not a lawyer, so maybe I should just stop talking about that because I don't really know of what I speak. So, all right, moving on. This next one is from Stack Diary, and it's a site that I don't normally read, but one of my followers pointed me to this, and thank you to them. And it's about some serious security problems with Linksys routers. According to TestedCoop, a Belgian equivalent of the Consumers Association, 2 types of Linksys routers are sending Wi-Fi login details in plain text to Amazon AWS servers. This discovery involves the Linksys VLOP, that's VELOP, Pro 6E and Pro 7 mesh routers. These are little pillars that kind of look like about the size of a Pringles can maybe, except they're more squared off than round. So if you have a Linksys router that looks like that in your house, pay attention to this. During routine installation checks, TestedCoop detected several data packets being transmitted to an AWS server in the US. These packets included the configured SSID name, that's the Wi-Fi name that you would see, when you bring up your phone and say, connect to this network, and the name provided there. That's the SSID name. So it included the SSID name and password in clear text, the identification tokens for the network within a broader database, and an access token for a user session, potentially paving the way for a man-in-the-middle attack. A man-in-the-middle attack is a security breach in which an attacker intercepts the communication between your Linksys router and the Amazon web server without either party's knowledge. In this context, it means the attacker could capture your Wi-Fi network name, or the SSID, and password as they are transmitted in plain text, allowing them to read or alter these sensitive details and potentially gain unauthorized access to your network. The consumer organization conducted these tests using the latest firmware available at the time. Despite warning Linksys in November, no effective measures have been taken. Linksys released a firmware update after the initial warning, but it did not address the concerns raised. And this is a quote from someone at TestedCoop, quote, "We regret the lack of response from Linksys and expected more from such a renowned brand," unquote. TestedCoop suspects the security issue might stem from third-party software used in Linksys firmware. However, they emphasize that this does not excuse the vulnerability. For those who already own the affected routers, they have recommended changing the Wi-Fi network name and password via the web interface instead of the app. This precaution prevents the SSID name and password from being transmitted in readable text. TestedCoop contacted Linksys again just a day before today's publication in response to the ongoing issue, giving them a brief window to respond. However, they have not received any acknowledgement or solution from the manufacturer. And again, another quote from the researchers, quote, "The vulnerability persists even in the latest Linksys 7 Pro, highlighting a critical security lapse. While breaching a network requires effort and technical skill, the attacker can cause extensive damage once inside. Linksys themselves recommended the VLOP product line for small offices, making this issue particularly concerning for both personal and professional environments." All right, so what it sounds like is there is an app to set up these routers, which is becoming more and more common these days with smart devices. And when using that app to set up these devices with the password and setting the SSID, and it looks like the app or the routers are sending some information up to some cloud server somewhere for Linksys probably, or maybe for a third party, I'm not sure, but that communication sends the credentials for your Wi-Fi router unencrypted. If they were really able to intercept this, that means the communication itself wasn't encrypted, which today is almost unheard of. And if someone were able to intercept that communication somehow, maybe you're in an apartment complex or you're in a neighborhood with a lot of close houses and somebody nearby is just kind of sniffing the air for communications like this. If they were able to intercept this, then they would be able to get on your Wi-Fi network and then get up to all sorts of no good. Now, how likely is that to happen? I don't know. But it really is a horrible mistake by Linksys, and they're right. I mean, Linksys is a huge name in networking products, and this should not have happened. My guess is probably the same as the researchers, and that is it may not have been Linksys code doing this. It may have been some third-party library or SDK that they were including that is making this mistake. But nevertheless, Linksys should be testing their products and should have caught this a long time ago and should have fixed it right away when notified. So if you have these products, you could log into the web interface for your router. That is, get on the Wi-Fi network. Or if these devices actually have an Ethernet plug on them, I'm not sure if they do, but you should be able to go to the administrator page for the router, which is a special designated web page, your manual that comes with the router, which you can probably download online if you don't have it anymore. We'll give you instructions on how to do that. And then if you change the password there, then apparently that does not send it in the clear to the web. So that would be a good idea. All right, next up, this is from Cyber News, and it's about the next iteration of what's called the RockU password list, which is basically a list maintained and traded amongst hackers for trying to brute force passwords. And this one is now the official largest known, which contains 10 billion unique passwords. The king is dead. Long live the king. Cyber News researchers discovered what appears to be the largest password compilation with a staggering 9,948,575,739 unique plain text passwords. The file with the data, titled RockU2024.txt, was posted on July 4th by forum user Obamacare. That's an odd name for a hacker, but okay. The team cross-referenced the passwords included in the RockU 2024 leak with data from Cyber News' leaked password checker, which revealed that these passwords came from a mix of old and new data breaches. And this is a quote from the researchers. They said, quote, "In its essence, the RockU 2024 leak is a compilation of real-world passwords used by individuals all over the world. Revealing that many passwords for threat actors substantially heightens the risk of credential stuffing attacks," unquote. Credential stuffing attacks can be severely damaging for users and businesses. For example, a recent wave of attacks targeting Satander, Ticketmaster, Advanced Auto Parts, Quote Wizard, and others was a direct result of credential stuffing attacks against the victim's cloud service provider, Snowflake. Also from the researchers, quote, "Threat actors could exploit the RockU 2024 password compilation to conduct brute force attacks and gain unauthorized access to various online accounts used by individuals who employ passwords included in the dataset," unquote. The RockU 2024 compilation did not just fall from the sky. 3 years ago, Cyber News published a story about the RockU 2021 password compilation, the largest at the time, with 8.4 billion plaintext passwords. According to the team's analysis of RockU 2024, attackers developed the dataset by scouring the internet for data leaks, adding another 1.5 billion passwords from 2021 through 2024, and increasing the dataset by 15%. The RockU 2021 compilation, an expansion of a data breach from 2009, included tens of millions of user passwords for social media accounts. Since then, however, the compilation has ballooned exponentially. Most likely, the latest RockU iteration contains information collected from over 4,000 databases over more than 2 decades. The Cyber News team believes the attackers can utilize the 10 billion strong RockU 2024 compilation to target any system that isn't protected against brute force attacks. This includes everything from online and offline services to internet-facing cameras and industrial hardware. One more quote from the team, quote, "Moreover, combined with other leaked databases on hacker forums and marketplaces, which, for example, contain user email addresses and other credentials, RockU 2024 can contribute to a cascade of data breaches, financial frauds, and identity thefts," unquote. While there is no silver bullet to protect users who had their passwords exposed, impacted individuals and organizations should take up mitigation strategies. The Cyber News research team advises to 1. Immediately reset the passwords for all accounts associated with leaked passwords. It is strongly recommended to select strong, unique passwords that are not reused across multiple platforms. 2. Enable multi-factor authentication, or MFA, wherever possible. This enhances security by requiring additional verification beyond a password. And 3. Utilize password manager software to securely generate and store complex passwords. Password managers mitigate the risk of password reuse across different accounts. Cyber News will include data from RockU 2024 in the leaked password checker, allowing anyone to check if their credentials were exposed via the latest record-holding exposed password compilation. All right, so let me just explain what this is. Really, all this is a massive text file full of breached passwords that have been discovered or hacked somehow over the past basically 2 decades. These are going to include things like password or password 1234 or monkey 123. All the really bad passwords that we know and love, but 10 billion of them, 10 billion unique ones. Now, I tried to download this file. There were a couple places I found on the web that had it, but they were really, really slow and the file was enormous. And a lot of people were saying that it's full of a bunch of junk too. So apparently it's not a clean listing of 10 billion passwords. But this Rocky thing has been around for a while, and if you have done any basic hacking, you will be familiar with it. There are cyber tools like John the Ripper that use lists like this to automate brute force attacks. In other words, to take all these passwords and probably pre-hash them using several common hashing techniques, and then when they get a password database from somewhere, look at all the hashed passwords and see if there's any matches. And then they would then know what your underlying password is. Or sometimes what they'll do is they'll just take these passwords and take a list of users that know have accounts on, let's say, a certain bank or social media accounts, and they may have gotten this from other places, and just combine the two and say, okay, just start trying all these passwords with all these email addresses and see if any of those combinations actually get me in. That is a brute force attack. And it's not done by hand, it's done by computer, so it can happen very, very quickly. And that's why it's important for sites that accept credentials over the web to have protections like rate limiting, like, you can't enter a million passwords per hour. If you fail 10 times in a row, they should cut you off for an hour or a day. But there's a lot of sites that do not do that. And if the thing that they are attacking is something that's offline, if they, steal your laptop or steal your phone or something that has password protections on it and they actually have it in their possession, they can loose their computer on it and just try as fast as possible. And if you're using one of these passwords, then they may eventually get in. So that is why you need a password manager to generate crazy, random, long, strong, unique passwords for all of your sites. And you don't have to remember them or even type them in because the password manager does all that for you. All right, next up, this is from TechCrunch, and it's about yet another AT&T breach. On Friday, which I think was just last Friday, AT&T said cyber criminals stole the phone records of, quote-unquote, nearly all of its customers, a data breach that will force the company to notify around 110 million users. AT&T said the stolen data included records like which phone numbers a certain customer called and texted, the total count of calls and texts, and call durations for a 6-month period beginning May 1st of 2022 through October 31st of 2022. AT&T said the stolen data does not include any content of calls or texts, nor their time or date. For some of the affected customers, the cybercriminals were also able to steal cell site identification numbers linked to phone calls and text messages, according to AT&T. This means that, potentially, someone could use this information to figure out the approximate location of a customer when they made a certain call or sent a text, and perhaps infer sensitive information about their lives. And this is a quote from Rachel Toback, a social engineering expert and founder of cybersecurity firm Social Proof Security. And Rachel says, quote, "This can reveal where someone lives, works, spends their free time, who they communicate with in secret, including affairs, any crime-based communication, or typical private, sensitive conversations that require secrecy. This is a big deal for anyone affected," unquote. AT&T blamed the incident on a recent breach at cloud service provider Snowflake, that's the second time we've heard that today, which has affected dozens of companies, including Ticketmaster, Santander Bank, and LendingTree subsidiary QuoteWizard. At this point, it's unclear exactly who is behind the Snowflake breach. Mandiant, the cybersecurity firm hired by Snowflake to investigate, said a financially motivated criminal group they identify as UNC 5537 was responsible. The type of data stolen in AT&T's data breach is typically referred to as metadata because it doesn't include the contents of calls or texts, but only information about those calls and texts. That, however, doesn't mean that there are no risks for the victims of this breach. Toback says that this type of data makes it easier for cybercriminals to impersonate people you trust, making it easier for them to craft more believable social engineering or phishing attacks against AT&T customers. Another quote from Toback, quote, "The attackers know exactly who you're likely to pick up a call from, who you're likely to text back, how long you communicate with that person, and even potentially where you were located during that conversation due to the metadata that was stolen," unquote. Runa Sandvik, the founder of Granite, a firm that helps journalists and activists be more secure, said that, quote, "Even if you don't do anything important or sensitive, who you talk to, when, and how often is still personal to you and should remain private to you as well." I think everyone should be very angry about this and demand better from the telcos. It's not enough to say, oh, by the way, your data was taken. We are sorry and taking this very seriously, unquote. Sandvik says it's more concerning for higher risk individuals affected by the breach. Again, quote, some may consider changing their numbers and using a different provider, but it just really depends on the circumstances, unquote. Higher risk individuals can include those who have a reason to shield their identity, such as survivors of domestic abuse. Sandvik also says that using encrypted chat apps like Signal, which doesn't hold the type of metadata AT&T just lost, and WhatsApp could be better for security because these companies have a better track record of protecting user data. Jake Williams, a cybersecurity expert and former NSA hacker, told TechCrunch that the risk is greater for businesses and intelligence targets following the AT&T breach. And this is a quote from Williams, quote, threat actors can use this data to create patterns of life. Call data records provide a wealth of value for intelligence analysts, unquote. Williams also said that it's possible hackers can combine this data with that of data breaches because, quote, previous AT&T incidents mapped customer phone numbers to other identifying information, simplifying weaponization of the newly compromised data. In short, this data is a goldmine for understanding who talks to whom, which can, for instance, be used for developing human sources, unquote. Okay, so that's obviously not for you and me, likely. This is more spy kind of stuff or espionage kind of stuff. But nevertheless, this is private data. And for the few people whose location information may have also been leaked with this metadata, that could be a real problem. But I also have to just agree with this sentiment that it is just no longer acceptable for these companies who are leaking their data like a sieve to come out and say, oh yeah, hey, sorry about that. We really, really value your privacy. Here is a year of, credit monitoring. And that's it. We need to somehow be able to hold these companies accountable for this, because until there's a real financial impact to them screwing up like this, they're not going to take security seriously. Why would they? So again, what this is for a 6-month period 2 years ago. This is a list of most of AT&T's customers' texts and call logs that apparently have, who was talking with whom, but not when or where in most cases. There is no content of the text messages, at least from what they're saying so far, and definitely not contents of the phone calls. But still, it's a massive data breach, and it's related again to the Snowflake breach, which just shows you how important these quote-unquote supply chain attacks are. A lot of these big companies rely on a very few subset of important tech companies that you've never heard of until these breaches occur, and then it becomes a real problem. So we need much more accountability for these security failures, or they're just going to continue. All right, just a couple more news stories and then a quick note about Proton, and then we'll get to my tip of the week. But these next two stories in particular are going to be a little bit longer and take a little bit more analysis. So this first one is from Stack Diary, and it's about a kerfuffle that happened on social media between Signal and a researcher or research team, both are true, named MISK, M-Y-S-K. And we've mentioned MISK before. And there's a lot of nuance to this, and I've got a lot of takeaways on this. But let me read this, and then I'll get to my take. Popular encrypted messaging app Signal is facing criticism over a security issue in its desktop application. Researchers and app users are raising concerns about how the app handles encryption keys on desktop services. Again, so basically on your computer, which is different from your smartphone. According to cybersecurity researchers MISK, the desktop version of Signal stores encryption keys in plain text, an issue that potentially exposes users to data theft. MISK detailed the problems on Twitter, highlighting that Signal's desktop app stores local chat history encryption keys in a plain text file accessible by any process on the system. And a quick quote from MISK, who said, quote, end-to-end encryption is useless if any of the ends get compromised, unquote, which is a point that I've often made on this program. According to MISK, Signal users who link a desktop app may have a false sense of security. They created a simple Python script that copied Signal's local storage directory on a Mac, then transferred this data to a fresh macOS installation in a virtual machine. By placing the copied data in the appropriate directory and installing Signal on the virtual machine, they successfully restored their entire Signal session, including chat histories. The researchers were then able to run 3 simultaneous active Signal sessions on the original Mac, an iPhone, and the virtual machine without any warning from Signal about the cloned session. Messages were delivered to either the Mac or VM, with the iPhone receiving all messages. Importantly, the phone still only showed one linked device, failing to detect the unauthorized cloned session on the virtual machine. The ability to transfer chat histories like this is not limited to macOS. A user on Twitter showed that the encryption keys in Signal's configuration file on Linux are set with permissions that make them readable by any process the local user runs. This means that while a keylogger might require admin access to install, any app or script with sufficient permissions could access these plain text keys. Naomi Brockwell, who we interviewed here just a couple months ago, recommended unlinking any desktop service from Signal accounts. Brockwell explains, quote, "A long-known problem is that Signal stores your decryption keys on desktop in a plain text file, not your keychain, making it accessible to any app." Unquote. But then she adds, if you trust your computer, you're fine, suggesting that users who are cautious about their system's security might want to reconsider using the desktop version of Signal. MISC's analysis aligns with a 2018 report by Bleeping Computer, which also highlighted the poor handling of encryption keys in Signal's desktop app. Signal's approach to end-to-end encryption focuses on protecting data in transit. However, once the data reaches the user's device, the responsibility for security largely falls on the user. While standard, this practice assumes the user's devices are secure from malicious software or unauthorized access, which may not always be the case. In 2018, in response to Bleeping Computer's article, Joshua Lund, who works at Signal, said the following: "The database key was never intended to be a secret. At-rest encryption is not something that Signal Desktop is currently trying to provide or has ever claimed to provide. Full disk encryption can be enabled at the OS level on most desktop platforms." So considering this context, it's questionable why Signal stores chat history in encrypted form at all, particularly since media attachments remain unencrypted. And that's a link to another article which I'll need to follow up on. I didn't realize that media attachments weren't encrypted either. It's clear that Signal has not altered its approach to this issue. We were able to confirm that on a Windows system. Signal continues to store a key to the config.json file in the app data directory. I was following this on Twitter, and Meredith Whitaker, who's the president of Signal, who I have a lot of respect for, responded this way: "There's been some chatter about Signal Desktop recently, so let's clear the air. 3 points. 1. The reported issues rely on an attacker already having full access to your device, either physically, through a malware compromise, or via a malicious application running on the same device. This is not something that Signal or any other app can fully protect against, nor do we ever claim to. 2. We continue working to harden our desktop build across supported operating systems and take advantage of new platform capabilities as they emerge. Those of you following our repo can follow this work there," and I'll come back to that. And 3, the posters who raised this issue did so without contacting us directly. Instead, they went straight to social media, in some cases using inflammatory language, and they dropped these claims over a U.S. holiday weekend. This is the opposite of responsible disclosure. We ask those who are serious about security and privacy to please engage us directly in the future instead of resorting first to online claims that can confuse non-experts and lead people to make unsafe choices and develop inaccurate mental models based on scary language. We monitor security at signal.org carefully and respond to all legitimate reports. All right, back to the article. The response to Meredith's statement has varying opinions on social media. Some users argue that the issue of storing encryption keys in plain text has been known for years, with the initial report dating back to 2018, which this article just talked about. The idea being that Signal has had ample time to address the problem. Others criticize the assertion that full device access is necessary for exploiting this vulnerability, pointing out that access to user-level files is sufficient. It's a tough one to balance. The mixed reactions highlight the tension between immediate security needs and developers' practical limitations in safeguarding local data. On April 1st, a pull request was made on GitHub, this is their code repo for Signal, that would alleviate this problem by implementing Electron's Safe Storage API, and on July 10th, which was just last week, one of Signal's developers finally accepted the Safe Storage API pull request on GitHub, which should mean that solution that was posted on April 1st, which kind of addresses this problem, I'll come back to it in a minute, has been accepted and will go into a future Signal release. It is possible that the concern about Signal's desktop encryption key storage may be overblown. One user on Twitter contends that the current setup is, quote, best for the masses, not the extremely security conscious, unquote. This viewpoint suggests that users highly concerned about potential zero-day exploits or arbitrary code execution should consider more extreme measures, such as setting message expiration timers to very short intervals or avoiding message retention altogether. And that's referring to a Signal feature where you can actually have your messages automatically deleted over a certain period of time, and you could do that per user or per group. And that user added, quote, even if you install as root and use sudo to open it, there are still privilege escalation 0 days, and I'm sure you don't inspect the source and checksum of all binaries you execute as root. This isn't as big of an issue as it's made out to be here, unquote. In a post on Mastodon, the researchers noted that this practice is common among many applications. They cited WhatsApp and Apple's iMessages as examples. WhatsApp's chat context can be accessed by any other launched application without restriction. iMessage, however, stores data in a sandbox, preventing unauthorized processes from accessing it. In both cases, attackers must first gain access to the local user account to reach such application data. Once this access is obtained, other data is typically also vulnerable, including locally stored documents that are usually unencrypted unless users take specific measures. The researchers point out that the level of protection needed for chat content compared to other locally stored data may vary depending on the specific situation. Okay, so there's kind of a lot to unpack here. I've actually been debating this at length with some of my privacy peeps, and I think there's a lot of blame to go around here. And first of all, yes, this was reported in 2018, so it is a known issue. So in that sense, MISC was basically saying, look, there's no reason to go through this private disclosure process because you've known about this for years. However, that said, the way it was presented on social media was, I think, a little bit alarmist. And there is something to be said for the fact that it's really, really hard to secure local data from malware running on that machine, because anything you can do, that malware can do. And sometimes that malware can even do more. If you have a non-administrator account as your normal account, there are bugs in software which allow malware to gain higher privileges. And so basically, I think Signal's perspective on this, which appears to match that of, other applications that are privacy and security oriented, is that, look, if you manage to get malware running on this system, if the endpoint itself is compromised, then there's not a whole lot we can do. And so therefore, we're not going to bother doing it. They count on things like, encrypting your entire hard drive to prevent somebody from stealing your laptop or stealing your smartphone and finding the keys and decrypting your stuff, because they won't be able to decrypt anything because the entire hard drive is encrypted. But if you're malware running on that system as the logged in user, or even somebody with higher privilege, it's really hard to hide stuff from that malware because they have the same permissions you do. If you can read your messages, they can read your messages. Even if the stuff was encrypted, the malware may be able to launch the app, maybe even behind the scenes without it coming up and you seeing it, launch it and then immediately put it in your dock or something like that, and then scroll through the stuff and screen grab it. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do as malware running on a system that's very hard to protect against. Okay, so there's that. But I also think that Meredith's response was a little bit tone deaf. I think you could say all you want about some random researcher, and this is honestly somebody who's done some really good work in the past, and you can kind of complain about the way they approach this problem, and I think some of those complaints could be valid. That doesn't mean you have to do the same thing. I personally, if I were in Meredith's position, would have been a little bit more diplomatic about it than she was. Maybe I would have reached out to them directly and privately, basically do the thing that you wanted them to do with you. And also, there are mitigations that can be used. In fact, we talked about it in this article. There are ways to sandbox data so that, for example, one application running as the user can't access data from another application, even for that same user. This is commonly done on smartphones now. In fact, a lot of the protections that are on smartphones really should be migrated to desktop computers. They're pretty good. So there are things that can be done. There are mitigation strategies. There are some steps that could make this better that I think they should do. And actually kind of sounds like they might be doing them. So after complaining about it and complaining about the way it was presented and something that was brought up 5 or 6 years ago that they're finally just now addressing, they are addressing it. And they're basically taking this person's advice. Now, it is possible. I mean, I'm a software engineer. I've seen this happen. It's possible for software companies of any size for things like this to just slip through the cracks. Mistakes are made. People are human. When this was first brought up in 2018, some of these sandboxing and other mitigation strategies probably didn't exist. And I'm not trying to excuse this. Signal needs to do better. They are the gold standard for this as far as I'm concerned. I will still recommend them, especially just for regular people like you and me. But they need to be making their stuff better constantly, and they need to be receptive and responsive to criticism like this, even when it's not done in, the best way. So if you are in a high risk category and you're using Signal as a desktop app, well, first of all, first thing you could do is not use it as a desktop app anymore. Just use it on your smartphone. But if you do use it on your desktop app and you link it to your account, you might want to set, disappearing messages so that the data is deleted on a consistent basis. Obviously, you want to make sure that your hard drive is encrypted. You want to be using the latest version of Signal because it sounds like they might actually be putting some mitigation strategies in soon. But otherwise, you need to follow some very careful internet hygiene and computer hygiene to make sure that you don't get infected, because once you get malware in your system, it's really, really hard to protect it. Signal should do what they can, but I don't consider it Signal's fault. If you manage to get infected by something else, there's a lot of different ways they can try to get at your Signal data, no matter what protections Signal tries to put on it. End-to-end encryption is exactly that. Between the two endpoints, it is extremely secure. But at the endpoints, by necessity, it needs to be unencrypted so that the people at either end can actually, write and read the messages. And that means that if the endpoint is compromised, then that data is potentially vulnerable. So act accordingly and bake that into your threat models and security strategies. Oh, and one more quick comment about this. The whole thing about cloning the messages and taking them to a different machine and having Signal not call that out, I would hope that Signal would be able to, if they haven't built this in already, defeat this particular situation. I mean, this is another tricky thing. Like, let's say I'm trying to spy on somebody. I know they use Signal. I managed to get access to the device either through malware or directly getting into their account on the device. And I do this. I copy off all of their Signal data. Okay, great. I've got that. But maybe they have, the messages being deleted right away or on a very short-term basis. If I can copy this data off of that machine to another machine, all of a sudden that other machine is basically a new Signal client for that user, automatically logged in and good to go. And now I can, watch the messages that go back and forth on that account. And Signal wouldn't call that out as a new device. Like, hey, that's weird. Maybe there's some IDs buried in there, but I'm seeing this ID twice. That's strange. I should call that out. So that's something else that Signal, I think, needs to address here. All right, one more kind of controversial story here, and then we'll get to some lighter fare. And this is directly from Mozilla. It's part of a press release they just put out, and it's something that I either missed or forgot about, but it's something they're calling privacy-preserving attribution. And it's about a supposedly privacy-preserving way to do trackable ads. So anyway, let me read this and I'll give a comment. Privacy-preserving attribution is an experimental feature in Firefox version 128, which, by the way, just came out. Mozilla is prototyping this feature in order to inform an emerging web standard designed to help sites understand how their ads perform without collecting data about individual people. By offering sites a non-invasive alternative to cross-site tracking, we hope to achieve a significant reduction in this harmful practice across the web. Attribution is how advertisers learn whether their advertising works. Attribution measures how many people saw an ad on a website and then later visited the advertiser's website to do something the advertiser cared about. For example, maybe someone sees an ad for a sale on a product and then buys that product. Attribution counts how many people do that. Attribution is very important to advertisers. Sadly, tracking is the only way to perform attribution without help from the browser. Tracking is terrible for privacy because it gives companies detailed information about what you do online. While Firefox includes many privacy protections that make it more difficult for sites to track you online, like enhanced tracking protection, total cookie protection, query parameter stripping, and many other measures, there's a huge incentive for sites to find ways around these in order to perform attribution. Our hope is that if we develop a good attribution solution, it will offer a real alternative to more objectionable practices like tracking. We are currently testing this approach to see if it can provide advertisers with the information they're looking for. PPA doesn't involve websites tracking you. Instead, your browser is in control. This means strong privacy safeguards, including the option to not participate, and I'll come back to that important point in a second. PPA is enabled in Firefox starting in version 128. A small number of sites are going to test this and provide feedback to inform our standardization plans and help us understand if this is likely to gain traction. PPA can be disabled in Firefox settings. Firefox provides an easy, simple option to disable the privacy-preserving attribution feature if users prefer not to participate. Websites will not know if you chose to opt out in this way. To opt out, do the following. In the menu bar at the top of the screen, click Firefox and select Preferences or Settings, depending on your macOS version. In the Privacy and Security panel, find the Website Advertising Preferences section and uncheck the box labeled Allow Websites to Perform Privacy-Preserving Ad Measurements. So the press release was longer than that, and they get into some other stuff. It also provides a link to a much more detailed and technical breakdown of what this PPA is actually doing under the covers, which I did read through, and so I will give you my take on what I found there. First of all, let's state the obvious. The way the web works today is we have an ad-based, quote-unquote, free model where a lot of sites don't charge you and instead sell ad space on their sites and make money that way. And these ad companies, Google and Facebook chief among them, but there are others, really want to be able to go back to the people advertising with them to give them as much information as possible about how effective their ads are. That is this attribution thing that we're talking about. And there's this notion of impressions and conversions. So an ad impression is when they can verify that somebody saw one of your ads. Sometimes it also means that they actually clicked on one of your ads. It's a two-part thing, but those are ad impressions. Those are the gotchas. That is, they successfully got their advertisement in front of you. And then a conversion is that you actually then did something based on that ad that they wanted you to do. And what that is kind of varies depending on what they want to measure. Sometimes it's sufficient that you just got to their website. Other times they actually want to know that you bought something from their website. That is called a conversion. And since these things often happen at different times and maybe even different devices, they really have a hard time linking those two things together. But they desperately want to do so. And of course, the classic quote here, and I looked this up because I wanted to know who said it, was by a guy named John Wanamaker. And he is the creator of what would eventually become Macy's. And he said this like over 100 years ago. And the quote is, "Half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The trouble is, I don't know which half." That is what this is trying to address. These people who are trying to advertise their products and try to get people to then go buy their products need some way to know if the ads they're placing are working. Because, if they put their ad in 20 different places and only 2 of those places are actually bringing in customers, then they want to focus their advertising on those 2 places and not on the others. So this whole attribution thing is crucial for somebody who's advertising. And again, the way this really works is there's people who want to sell products and there's places that need to sell advertising space. And then there's companies like Google who matchmake in between and put those together and take money from companies that want to advertise and then give that money to the websites when they show ads and convert and yada, yada, yada. That's the whole ad marketing thing that's happening here. Now, I was kind of surprised to see that Firefox was doing this because Firefox is very privacy oriented. And it's the reason that I often recommend them as my favorite browser. It's the one I use on all my devices. And they have gone to great lengths to prevent this web tracking. And some of their technology is very good at it. But these companies are so desperate to do this attribution that it's this constant cat and mouse game where they're trying to work around all these privacy protections to track you anyway. Now, I read through the technical details of this, and it's certainly in spirit very similar to what Google is trying to do with their privacy sandbox and their topics API. They are trying to learn more about you in a way that doesn't impact any particular person's privacy. They're trying to basically do a lot of this stuff in aggregate. And that is what Mozilla is trying to do here as well. When I looked into this, I also found out that they're working with Meta, in other words, Facebook, on this, which is another black mark as far as I'm concerned. But I understand, again, why they're trying to do this. As people are blocking third-party cookies and trying to block all this tracking, they are desperately trying to find something that will work, that people will allow to work, so that they can continue with their advertising business. They're trying to use some of these privacy-enhancing technologies, these PETs that we talked about last week with our NAP. Specifically, Mozilla's plan is using differential privacy and multi-party computation. They're trying to do this right. And the upshot of what these things do, this and Google's privacy sandbox, is they're trying to get the browser to record all this information instead of the websites you visit and recording this information via third-party cookies and such, and keeping it all local to the browser, and then have the browser in a privacy-preserving way aggregate and report this data in such a fashion that nobody can figure out specifically who that information is about, but in aggregate can see that, okay, of these 10 websites where I posted this ad, 2 of them had a very strong conversion rate. I don't know who did it. I may know a little bit about when, but that's about it. And by the way, another way that this attribution is often done is through these promo codes. You see these all the time, right? You'll get an email from somebody saying, hey, we're having a special this week. You bought from us before, or you've been on our website many times and never bought something. Here's a promo code that you can use for the next month or something to buy a product, and we'll give you a discount. Well, that specific promo code helps them attribute the advertising campaign directly. Like whoever uses that promo code, got it hopefully from their advertising campaign. Now, of course, there are deal coupon sites that totally screw that up by publishing these promo codes to everybody. And so that screws up their whole attribution thing to the point where a lot of times once these codes show up on those deal coupon sites, they're canceled immediately because they're now useless to them. The whole point of the promo code was to help them figure out how to attribute the impression with the conversion. All right, just a couple more notes about this. So far, this appears to only handle the attribution aspect. Obviously, there's a lot more to advertising that Google and Facebook offer about very detailed demographics on the people that are looking at and buying their products. That is not included in this whatsoever. Also, this is a very limited trial. There's only certain websites that are even participating in this. It is also not the full solution. They are just testing part of this technology. And also, I have to think that ad blockers would completely screw up this whole process because you're not being showed the ads in the first place. But if you're interested in the details, if you really want to dig into it, there are links in the show notes that take you to Mozilla's more detailed description of this. It's worth a read. It's not super long, but I'm going to be keeping an eye on this, and I will let you know what I find. The devil's always in the details. I'll be very interested to see what other people think about this, and if they can find ways to break it, if they can find ways to manipulate this system to still track individual people. Like, for example, looking at the technical details, there's an ad campaign ID that's recorded. If you were to give up a particular ID per person, then I would think you could track them no matter what you did to try to hide their identity. But I want to make 2 other points at a much higher level. First of all, this really kind of is the holy grail. If we're going to say that we want to have this ad-driven web economy where we have these quote-unquote free services, and the way we pay for them is by looking at ads and not blocking them, then coming up with some way to do that preserves our privacy is a really, really big deal and worth trying to figure out. I don't know if they'll get there, but, I applaud the fact that they're trying. On the other hand, Mozilla is creeping me out that they're doing this in the first place. Apparently, they've also recently merged with or acquired an ad company, and they've got to make money too. I get it. I just don't like that they're doing it any more than I like that Apple has its own ad business either. I think they should just leave that alone. Of course, Apple's making more money than just about any other company on the planet, and that is certainly not the same as Mozilla. But also, they really absolutely should not have turned this on by default. I am sure that they needed people to do this so they could test it. And if they did it as an opt-in thing, they probably would have gotten no uptake whatsoever. I understand why they did it, but they should not have done it that way. So I'm sure we'll have more to say about this in the future. I will keep an eye on it, and I will report back as there are new developments. All right, finally, I was going to read this article from Lifehacker, but I'm just going to summarize it actually very quickly. You can still find the link in the show notes if you want. But basically, Proton has just come out with a end-to-end encrypted private version of Google Docs, something I've been wanting for so long. I've only played with it a little bit, but it does look very full-featured. It's got a nice slick interface. It looks very reminiscent of Google Docs. I'll have to play with it some more to figure out if there's any major features that I like that are missing, but it looks pretty good so far. But it's something that I've been wanting for so long. It's one of the last few Google services that I have not been able to replace. So this is a really huge deal for me. If you have not tried Proton at all, this might be the thing that, gets you to give it a shot. They do have a very usable free tier that you can start with to play around with. But I'm very interested in doing that. I have confirmed with Andy Yen, the CEO, that he's going to come back and we're going to talk about this and other new things that Proton is doing and will be doing in the near future. So I'm very much looking forward to that. They've come out with all sorts of new stuff. They've got the password manager. They've also just released a new feature for their password manager that allows you to securely share credentials with people on a limited basis. They're doing some great work. So I'm very much looking forward to talking to Andy about all of that sometime in the next couple months. Okay, so let's jump to my tip of the week. And I want to talk to you again about blocking ads. It's obviously very relevant to something we're talking about today. And it's something that I've covered on and off over the years. I had an older article about this that I called On the Ethics of Ad Blocking. And I realized as I was doing some research for this, that I wrote that almost 8 years ago now. It still holds up pretty well, actually. But I wanted to revisit it for the tip of the week. And again, if you go to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons, the top blog article there is the full-length version of this with all sorts of helpful links and other information. I highly recommend that you do that. And if you want this information to just come to you automatically every 2 weeks, you can sign up for my newsletter because my blog and my newsletter are almost always the same thing. So really quickly, ads are obviously ubiquitous today. They're often very annoying. I understand that part of it, but they're also a privacy risk and even a security risk. We've already talked about the privacy risks in terms of a lot of these ads wanting to track you and build these dossiers on you. But because of the way the ad networks work, and it's kind of like billboard space available for anybody to buy, bad guys often buy that space and put up phishing ads or even ads that can deliver malware, either by clicking on them or in some cases just by visiting the page. That's less common, but it has happened. And so I think everybody is perfectly within their rights to block most ads, even just the annoying part. I mean, I've seen other people browse the web who don't have ad blockers installed, and I just blows my mind. How can you even deal with that? It's just so annoying. So I've been using an ad blocker for a long time. And as far as the ethics go, yes, these websites need to show ads to make money and they need money to survive. I get that. So, there are ways that you can certainly disable ad blocking on websites that you want to access because maybe they block you if you don't turn off your ad blocker, or because you want to support them. You are going to take some risks in doing that, but it's often possible to actually view the ads and still block the tracking, which the solutions I'm going to give to you today will hopefully do for you. So there's two kind of basic ways that I talk about blocking ads. First of all is in your browser. And the best way to do that is to install uBlock Origin. There are many ad blockers out there. It's been called the biggest boycott in history because there are so many of them and so many people use them because we all hate these horrible, annoying ads. But the best one by far, bar none, is uBlock Origin. Now, do not confuse that with uBlock. This is something I kind of wish one of these guys would change the names. But uBlock and uBlock Origin are not the same thing, and there's a long, nasty history between those two products. The one you want, for sure, is uBlock Origin. And to get the full benefit of uBlock Origin, you need to use a browser like Firefox, because all the Chromium-based browser, including Google Chrome and Microsoft Edge, are now using this thing called Manifest v3, which basically prevents uBlock Origin from doing what it really needs to do to properly block ads. In fact, they had to come out with uBlock Origin Lite to address those browsers because they can no longer do what they used to be able to do. So another reason to switch to Firefox. Now, if you, for some reason, don't like uBlock Origin, you can also try EFF's Privacy Badger or DuckDuckGo's Privacy Essentials. They also do similar things. You could theoretically install 2 or 3 of those if you wanted to. They all kind of do the same thing, and they do it a little differently. They can interfere with each other some, but from my experience, uBlock Origin is all you need. And uBlock Origin has got a lot of other really cool features that let you get rid of other pop-ups and things. It's got this little zapper feature. You know, when something pops over and you visit that site all the time and you're tired of seeing the pop-up saying subscribe to my newsletter, you can actually, with uBlock Origin, zap those so they're never shown again, which is wonderful. But the other one I want to spend more time on today is one I don't talk about as much, and that is blocking ads using DNS, or the domain name system. So again, the domain name system is kind of like the phone book for the internet. It converts names to numbers, and instead of persons' names to telephone numbers, it converts domain names like firewallsdon'tstrapdragons.com to an IP address like 34.174.87.100. That last one is something that we don't like as humans, but computers, that's what they need to route these things. So this is the conversion your computer is doing whenever it's trying to get to websites. And websites with ads have all sorts of well-known advertising domain names that they go to call out to show these ads. So you can just intercept that lookup, and whenever it's for a well-known ad site, just don't let that route through. And then those ads can't show up. Your browser can't fetch them. So one of the really cool things about using DNS is that it's not just for your web browser. A lot of your apps on your computer are also doing the same thing. If it's a free app that you've installed on your computer that's ad-based, it can sometimes block those ads as well. But if you go even one step up in the food chain, if you go up to your router, your home router, your Wi-Fi router at home, and set that DNS on that device, which will then propagate to all the other devices in your home, you can now block ads for everything within your home network. Now, there can be exceptions to that. Each device in your home could theoretically define its own DNS server, but generally the way it works is when these devices come up and ask to get on the network, part of the information provided by the router, other than the IP address to use locally, is also, hey, when you want to do a DNS query, here's where you should send it. Usually that's to the router, and then the router sends it on to wherever they want to do it. By default, the way that usually works is it goes to your internet service provider. And your internet service provider, by the way, uses that information to track all the websites you go to, and may even be bundling those up and selling those to somebody else as well. So another great reason to use some DNS besides your internet service provider is to deny them at least a way to easily track where you go. Even if you don't do DNS lookups through them, they can still see the IP addresses you go to, and they can look those up as well. But it's not quite as straightforward. So within the whole DNS solution, there's 2 solutions that I'm going to propose. First of all, NextDNS. There are other ones that do this as well, but NextDNS is my favorite. It's extremely customizable. It's very, very powerful, and it just works like a charm. So NextDNS has a free version, but it's limited to how many queries you can do per month. I just pay for it. It's not that expensive. I think it's like $50 a year or something like that. And when I set my home router to use that DNS, and so every device in my house then uses NextDNS for DNS, I get ad blocking on every device in my home, which is fantastic. Now, for devices that can leave my home, like my smartphone and my laptop, you can also configure DNS directly on those devices to use NextDNS as well. And if you go to the NextDNS site, they've got a really nice listing there for how to set up NextDNS on all those devices. In some cases, you download this profile, and it's just a matter of double-clicking this profile and your operating system saying, are you sure you want to do this? And you say yes. And then now you're using that DNS. It's actually gotten pretty simple. And then you can go to the NextDNS dashboard and get all sorts of really cool analytics to see how many ads you've blocked and where they're coming from and things like that. It's really neat. Techlore, which is a fantastic website, and Henry and those guys are some of my favorite privacy people. They have done a really detailed NextDNS video. It's about 40 minutes long. I've got a link to it in the show notes. That's well worth the watch, because NextDNS does so much more than just ad and tracker blocking. So that's option 1. Now, if you're a do-it-yourselfer, if you're a hobbyist, if you like to muck around with computers and electronics, another solution that's kind of similar is a project called Pi-hole. And that's P-I-H-O-L-E, Pi like the Greek letter, because it's based on the Raspberry Pi mini computer. And you could buy a Raspberry Pi for about $35, but you'll also need to buy a power supply and a case and an SD card. It'll run you maybe $100 when it's all said and done. But basically, you set up this little dedicated DNS server in your house, and then you point your router to that for DNS lookups. Effectively, it does the same thing, and it's also got some fun dashboards and things. It's a little more involved, but hey, if you don't want to pay an ongoing subscription for NextDNS and you want to, have a little fun little project, that is a cool way to go. The only downside to that is for your devices that leave your home, it's kind of harder to use that Pi-hole. You can set up, VPN connections back to your home router that peek into your Raspberry Pi, but that's a pain in the butt. So anyway, I have migrated to NextDNS and I've loved it. But if you want to, get a little more geeky and try something on your own, check out the Pi-hole project. So there are a couple caveats and gotchas to this whole thing. When you start introducing things like uBlock Origin or NextDNS, either one of them, they start blocking things, and some websites just do not like that. Some will detect that you are trying to block ads and complain, and they'll either not let you into their site until you've disabled your ad blocker, or sometimes they'll just pop up a warning, and if you kind of have to look for the little hidden link that says continue this time, and I promise next time I'll block my ads. They're all a little bit different. But some websites, they just outright break. Like, things just don't work. Like, whoever designed that webpage did not take into account the fact that somebody might go to the trouble of blocking certain elements of that page from loading. So some websites will just not function. Like, they won't load at all, or they're partially load, or they look like they load, but then you go to fill out a form or click a button and nothing happens. You'll need to be aware that when you're using these kind of technologies, it can cause things like that to happen, and you're going to have to do some debugging. You can actually pretty easily just turn off uBlock Origin, for example, on any given website, either temporarily or permanently, and then reload the page and see if it works, and then you'll know that was the problem. If it's NextDNS, however, you're actually going to have to log into your NextDNS account, look at the logs. It'll show you like live updates of what was recently blocked and why. And, you may find it's something there. And then from NextDNS, you can put it on your allow list, either temporarily or permanently, and see if that fixes your problem. It sounds bad and it can be frustrating. It doesn't happen that often. I just want you to be aware that it can happen when you're doing this sorts of blocking. Now, by the way, there's no reason you can't do both. I do both. I have both uBlock Origin and NextDNS. They do different things in different ways. They don't really interfere with each other. It just does mean that if you have to debug, now you've got to check both those as possible sources of the problem. One more thing I will add is that if you use a VPN, a lot of times your VPN service will have its own dedicated DNS service. So unless you do some kind of tricky configurations, when you're using a VPN, often that means you're not using NextDNS. But, if you're using uBlock Origin, then you're still going to get that protection. You're just not going to get the NextDNS protection. In fact, a lot of times I actually use this fact that the VPN doesn't use NextDNS, because oftentimes when I'm like in a newsletter or somebody sends me a form email that they sent to a lot of people, the services that send mass mailings often replace whatever links are in that email with special redirect links, because they want to know who clicked on what and when. And those redirect links under the covers can be blocked by NextDNS. So you'll click on the ads and they just won't go anywhere. They don't work. And so in cases like that, often what I'll do is I'll just quickly turn on my VPN and click on it again. And very often then it will go through, and then I'll turn my VPN back off. Yes, that means that some analytics somewhere knew that I clicked on that link. But in most cases, that's all they're looking for, is just knowing that someone did click it, and that's fine. So there you have it, everybody, your news and your tip of the week. All right, everybody, that'll do it this week. Thank you for tuning in. A couple quick reminders. First of all, I do take your questions, listener questions, Dear Carrie questions. You can go to fdsd.me/Q&A. That link is in the show notes. Or you can just send me an email at dearcarrie@firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com, and that's CAREY. So real quick on the book surge. First of all, again, thank you very, very much to everybody who participated. I'm sure we sold a good number of books. We got very close to hitting the top 10. If you're curious, I do have some statistics on that and some graphing. I will try to put that up somewhere. Maybe I'll add that to the bottom of the Book Surge blog post on my website. But we got very close to hitting the top 10, and I want to give it one more shot. So what I'm going to do is for Saturday, July 20th, I'm going to pick a single day. So if you missed it last week for some reason or didn't get around to doing it and would like to try again, go to Amazon.com and buy a copy of my book this Saturday, July 20th. If you are willing to buy more than one copy, Currently, Amazon has a 3 for the price of 2 sale going on. It's not just my book, it's other stuff too. So I guess actually you might be able to use that to buy some other books besides mine. But if you wanted to buy 3 copies of my book for the price of 2, you could give the extra copies to friends and family, or maybe to your local library, a local high school library maybe, or a senior center. That's a great place for this book. So that's a potential option, and you could do that. And if you can do it on Saturday, we'll see if we can't focus all of our attention on a single day and give it one more shot to crack into the top 10. Because we didn't really hit the milestones. I did get some extra reviews, just a handful, which is, look, better than nothing, but it's really, really hard to get reviews. I definitely need more. You can still do that, because I would also like to get the average rating of my book up. It only went up 1/10 of a point, and I'd really like to get it up higher. So that is something else you could do. And I don't know if doing that on Saturday really counts. Actually, I think it takes them like even 24 hours before the review posts. So maybe you could do it on Friday. I don't know that even matters as far as timing, but that is still something I would love to have you do. So we'll give that one more shot. Because we didn't really make the milestones, I'm going to hold off on planning a Zoom call. Nevertheless, if you did do something here, save some evidence of that. Take a screenshot of your social media post or your purchase email or something like that. Just hold on to it. I've got a couple more campaigns I want to run in the next 2 or 3 months or so. And at the end of all that, I think I'm going to have a thank you Zoom party. And so you'll need some way to punch that ticket to get your invite to that party. So hold on to that evidence. I may be asking for that later. Now, I do have one more promotion, and thank you very much to Gray Fox, which is the handle for one of my patrons, who had an extra ticket to DEF CON and is offering it up to me to give away to you. I realize this is only going to appeal to a limited number of you. First of all, you've got to be able to go. Again, it's August 8th through 11th in Las Vegas, Nevada. So you're going to have to buy a plane ticket, and you're going to have to get lodging. But if you'd like to get in and save $480, we've got a ticket to give you. So I'm going to do a straight up raffle on that. If you are willing and able to go, send an email to me at DC24, as in DEFCON 24, DC24 at firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com. And I'll put that in the show notes too, so you don't have to remember it. But shoot me an email and say that you'd like to enter that raffle. Now, I am going to throw in one other bit of incentive. As you know, I give away Dragon Challenge coins from time to time. And besides having this really super cool Dragon coin that also doubles as a D20 die that you can use to generate passphrases at my website, d20key.com, if you should ever meet me in person and present this coin, I will buy you a drink on me. So what I'm going to offer here as an additional incentive to do this raffle is if you sign up to be an annual patron at the Knight Errant level or higher, and you win the raffle, I will personally hand you a Dragon Challenge coin and buy you a drink on the spot in wonderful Las Vegas, Nevada, when we both go to DEF CON. And note that I'm still doing the treasure chest promotion. That's an ongoing thing for people who sign up as a patron for Knight Errant and above. And that is, you basically get a $40 value coupon for either Malware Bytes, Proton, or Safing's Portmaster. So it covers a good bit of your annual subscription. So that's all kind of wrapped into one. If you've got any questions, you can let me know when you send me an email at dc24 at firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com. I will announce that winner probably in 2 weeks. I want to make sure I have time to get it to everybody but before we go to Las Vegas. So sometime in the next 2 weeks, if you want to enter into that raffle for a free ticket to DEF CON 32, just shoot me that email. And you can wait, of course, until you find out if you win. If you also want to become a patron to do the Dragon Coin thing, that's totally up to you. All right, we're already running long, so let me cut it off here. We've got a great interview next week on OSINT, or Open Source Intelligence, with Jason Edison from Intel Techniques. That was a really great interview, so stay tuned for that. And lots of other great stuff coming down the pike, so if you haven't already, subscribe, and then you won't miss any of that goodness. All right, take care, everybody. Stay safe out there, and until next week, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.